Steve Adubato, this is part of our series called The Future of Urban Education. We're taping in Newark, New Jersey at the North Ward Center. It is our pleasure to welcome Dr. Benjamin Justice, professor of the Graduate School of Education at my alma mater, a great school, not because I went there, but Rutgers University. Good to see you, Doctor.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
And thank you for being part of our forum on urban education. Big picture, you see and look at and research urban school systems across this nation. Why is urban education overall so challenging?
Urban education is challenging because urban living is challenging. And, my colleague at Rutgers Newark, Gene Anion, who recently passed, once said that trying to change urban schools is like trying to run an air filter next to a screen door. It's really difficult to clean the air with all the other air coming in, right? And,
right.
Urban schools are challenging because cities are challenging, and cities are challenging as a result of policy over the course of the 20th century. So it's not surprising that we're in the situation that we're in.
You've talked about school reform. I'm curious about this. Define school reform, and is it different in every case?
So school reform is, we define when I teach a course called History of School Reform, we define a school reform as a planned effort to make a school better. And I think by and large, people who engage in school reform do try to make schools better. But what's also true is the old expression that when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, right? And so—
I mean, you're looking for a problem.
Well, you're looking for a particular kind of problem, and sometimes you'll see a situation and you'll define it in a way where you feel like you can fix it without having to change your tools. And
what's the larger reality in your view?
Well, the larger reality is, again, that urban education in particular requires a look not just at what schools are doing, but what communities are doing, what businesses are doing, what state government is doing.
Schools
or not. Schools largely reflect the communities that they serve and that serve the schools.
Is there something about Newark, and we're taping in Newark, based on the 1947 Constitution in New Jersey, the state has responsibility for education. So therefore, in 3 major urban school systems, including Newark and Jersey City, the state took over. The state said, you're failing, we're coming in. Now, local control is coming back in many of these districts, if ultimately not all of them. Here's my question. Do you believe that the state of New Jersey taking over an urban school district is equipped to do that, or any state?
Well, I would say that states have a role to play in education.
Is it to control it?
It depends on what you mean by control. So here's what states can do.
Sure.
States can find ways to fund the schools in general, right? Because what happens in states is that people play the hide the wealth game, right? And they hide the wealth in some places.
Explain that to folks.
Well, so the hide the wealth game is that states created the suburbs, right? The suburbs didn't just happen.
You build a lot of highways, you build malls, that's what happens.
It's federal policy, it's state policy, it's local policy. But the state is the unit of government that can do something about this because there is no federal mandate for public education. That's a state issue. So states have to take responsibility for it. So there is a role for state government. The problem is that state governments can't see the local context. They can't see what families need. They can't see what individual kids need. They can't see what communities need. So there's a role for states, but there's also a role for local government, and there's a role for communities. And it's getting the right balance among those that's really the challenge.
And so for Newark, as it's about to have quote unquote local control again after 20 years or so, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think some of the first things that need to be done to not just have local control, but take advantage of local control on behalf of the students?
Right. Can I answer that in 2 ways?
Go ahead.
Okay. The first is we should anticipate that there will be a backlash where people will blame what goes wrong with the schools on local control. So we should be prepared for that.
You see,
right?
We should have kept the state in control. That's the kind of thing that will be said.
Right, because look at the bumbling locals not doing the right job, right? That will be the narrative.
But it wasn't like the state was doing a bang-up job either.
That's right, and the state is the one that created Newark as we know it, right? So we got to be prepared for the narrative that's going to come down the road on that. And the second is that as much as possible, we need to find ways to bring resources. And I don't just mean money. I mean healthy communities. I mean jobs. I mean highly trained teachers. I mean the kinds of things that make communities healthy, right, that you see in well-resourced communities. Community centers are terrific. This is a great thing.
Like the Northwood Center or
right,
others.
Absolutely.
New Community Corporation, La Casa de Don Pedro, they happen to be community-based organizations in the area we're in. What role do they play in urban education?
Well, what they do is they create those that kind of social glue that makes a community healthy, right? Individual struggling families are not going to be as effective at raising children as communities who are working together. So kids have great places to go after school, kids have healthy friendships, kids have groups that they belong to, kids can have relationships with multiple adult role models, just not their parents. These are all things that we can do that don't necessarily happen in the classroom, but can make what happens in the classroom much more effective.
You know, you're at Rutgers. What is the role for higher education in urban education?
Oh, that's a great question.
Because we invited you here. There was no other institution of higher learning represented.
Right.
There are others involved in urban education, but you're here for a reason.
Right. So different institutions play different roles, but in general, what I will say is this. What we can do is bring research to bear on educational problems. And research,
for example?
So for example, so I'm a historian. So one thing that historians can do is historians can help people understand how we got here by looking at the past. And when you see that, you can then resist narratives that, again, turn problems into nails.
Those who ignore the past?
Yeah, something like that, yeah. And then there are other kinds of research. You know, what's the best way to teach mathematics? You know, I've got colleagues at Rutgers who study how do you teach kids how to prove something? Like, that's fabulous. Don't ask me to answer that question, by the way, because I have no idea.
But there's research on it.
But there's research on
and best
that.
practices.
Right. That's what, so best practices ideally grows out of people who are practitioners, who know how to work with kids, are dealing with researchers who have the time and the expertise to study what works best, and they come together, and that's best practices.
Dr. Benjamin Justice from Rutgers University is going to be part of the forum that we'll be convening in just a few minutes with 9 people who care deeply about urban education, not just in Newark, not just in New Jersey, but across this nation. And we want to thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us.
My pleasure.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is brought to you from the Agnes Veris NJTV studio at 2 Gateway. Funding has been provided by New Jersey Resources, the Northwood Center, TD Bank, Hackensack Meridian Health, Verizon, the Turl Fund, supporting Right from the Start NJ, and by NJM Insurance Group. Promotional support provided by NJ Advance Media and by the New Jersey Business and Industry Association.